A few days ago, a former Minister of Aviation, Femi Fani-Kayode, led some former top government officials, including former Minister of Communications and Digital Economy, Professor Issa Pantami, on a condolence visit to the Embassy of Russia in Abuja, following the attack at Crocus City Hall in Moscow by 4 gunmen, killing over 137 people. Speaking during the visit, the former aviation minister enjoins the Russian government to identify those who were behind their attack and bring them to book.
We've come to stand in complete solidarity with the people of Russia for the terrible events that took place a few days ago. We condemn these events. We condemn those that are behind these events. We condemn those that orchestrated and funded these events. And we came here as an expression of our total and complete solidarity with not just the Russian ambassador, but with President Putin and the Russian people. Terrorism is something that we must all come together to resist and fight. We've had our own fair share in this country. Russia has always stood with us and always tried their best to help us. And I believe strongly that in their own time of need, we must reciprocate, and that's why we're here.
Russia has been part of this country, really. I am like from fertilizer producers in this country. Recently, Russia donated fertilizer to this country. So we feel it's only fair for Nigerians, for all walk of life, to come and commiserate with the Russian people. So that's why we're here. That's all.
Well, Femi Fani-Kayode joins us now in the studios to look at this visit and other issues in the polity, Russia-Ukraine war, its effect on global economy and fighting terrorism generally. Very warm welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and happy Easter.
Same to you. Thank you very much.
Out there to Nigerians.
Thank you.
Do we start with the terrorism issue? It's raised concern. You led a delegation of some former colleagues and the rest. Why is it so important, Nigeria to have its own fair share of terrorist activities in its own space?
Well, indeed, I think it's important that if anybody on the planet Earth, the world that we live in, is subjected to the kind of atrocities that the people of Moscow were just the other day, last week, I think it's important that we stand with anybody, no matter how we feel about them politically or otherwise, and express our solidarity and our concern and our commiserations and condolences. And that's primarily the purpose for going to see the Russian ambassador. And they received us so warmly with great appreciation, I might add. Of course, these things are happening all over the world, and it's not just started. In the same way, many of us feel strongly about the atrocities that are being committed in Gaza and other parts of the world, and of course in Nigeria as well, where we've had our own fair share of terror attacks, and at each point we are constrained by our faith and by humanity to express our concern and express condolences primarily for those that lost their loved ones. So it is very important, and I think it was a historic visit, and it was much appreciated by the Russians.
Okay, I mean, the historic visit, some international relations experts, diplomats and Nigerians are probably seeing it, from a different perspective, that it's like your delegation is testing the waters. Yes, it had no government delegation, but former government officials, at the ministerial cabinet level, is Nigeria trying to move from the West to the East, when it comes to relations and the rest, when it comes to economic survival like we're having in this country today?
Well, we didn't go there in any government capacity whatsoever. I mean, I left government in the year 2007, many, many years ago. We didn't go there to represent any government, least of all the present federal government, and we weren't asked to do that. We went there as human beings, as concerned Nigerians, as friends of Russia. All of us that went there, well acquainted with the Russian people and the Russian state. We all admire President Putin of Russia, and we admire what Russia is doing, on the African continent and indeed throughout the world. I have been a great supporter and friend of Russia since the war in Syria, if you remember what happened then, and for reasons that are known to everybody, the position they took concerning President Bashar al-Assad, who would not have survived without their support. This is a secular government fighting a jihadist Islamist militia, if you remember in those days,
ISIL.
Yeah, and they prevailed only because the Russians stood by them. So for me, for many, many years, I have been close to the Russians, and therefore it's only natural for me to go there in my own capacity. And I might add that all those that went also feel the same way about Russia. And there were many, many people that would have gone. We limited it to just 6 people. But honestly, by the time we got home, we were getting calls from all over why didn't you tell us? We would have loved to come as well. I believe it's fair to say that Russia is the new kid on the block, if you like, on the African continent. And it doesn't mean we're moving away from anybody. I mean, you know, you don't have to move away from
Nigeria has always been non-aligned. Yeah. So it says Nigeria is trying to join the BRICS. Russia is there.
Yeah, I think, yes, the term non-alignment, in my view, is probably a little bit outdated, because now you have a unipolar world as opposed to bipolar world. But really the Nigerian state and Nigerian government successively have been excessively close to the Americans and to the British, the former colonial masters. That in itself, in my view, has its own set of baggage.
Shortcomings?
Yes,
definitely. That's why with the World Bank and the IMF,
so many
the Bretton Woods
so many things to that. And the question is, have they been fair to us? In my view, and this is just my own personal view, I speak for myself, I don't think they have been too fair. And
do you think a strengthened relationship with Russia would benefit Nigeria when Ajaokuta plant is still a failed project? Okay. The aluminium smelter company, which is supposed to be a joint venture between Reynolds of America, the Russians, and Nigeria, is not seen the light of day.
Well, let me put this to you: the failure for Ajaokuta was 100%. 100% is a consequence of the activities of successive federal governments, not the fault of the Russian partners who initiated it and who tried their very best to help. And this goes across the board. And what you have is a systematic failure of successive governments to ensure the right thing is done on our part, on our soil, by our people. That is a given. But let me put this to you. It's not so much about the economic issues, because that is a secondary issue. It's the security issues. And the day I started getting nervous about particularly the Americans, and I'm not anti-American, I'm not anti-West. My entire life from the age of 6 or 7, I went to school in the United Kingdom. So, I cannot possibly be anti-West. However, I am pro-fairness, I'm pro-humanity, and I'm pro-equity. And I can't stand the concept of neocolonialism or imperialism. Now, listen to this. During the course of the height of the war against Boko Haram, when President Jonathan was in power, we had a terrible experience whereby the American government, led by Obama at the time, I believe, said clearly and categorically that they would not sell arms to us in our fight against Boko Haram. By that time, Boko Haram had taken over probably half of the northeastern zone of Nigeria. We couldn't get arms from the Americans. Not only that, they went as far as to say that no other country that was linked to them should sell us arms, including the Israelis. Nobody would sell us arms. And if you remember, we had to resort to buying arms with cash.
From the black market.
From the black market to defend our people and defend our army.
We had the Russian over $10 million that was hanging, in South Africa.
I mean, we had to do these things. Well, we did them. We did what we needed to do. And not only that, we contracted with a company called Executive Outcomes. It's essentially a mercenary organization, a private army led by a good friend of mine, who sent his team over here. And as a consequence of that, Boko Haram was pushed all the way out, right to Sambisa Forest. Yeah, absolutely, to Sambisa Forest. And unfortunately, by the time President Buhari came in 2015, he reversed all that. And what happened? Boko Haram came back and got even more land.
More lethal.
So there you have a situation where our great friend, our allies from the West, America, the UK, and all of them, including France, decided to ensure that we could not defend our people and defend ourselves.
How did Russia defend us here?
What happened there was this. At that point in time, Russia was not in the equation at all, because we were not looking in that direction. We're simply helping ourselves. But our allies, our lifelong friends, our former colonial masters, in my view, completely betrayed us. It was in 2014 that they, number one, finally recognized Boko Haram as a terrorist organization, which is very curious considering the fact that they've been killing our people since 2009. And then it was in 2014 that they began to realize that, listen, these guys are fighting Boko Haram without us, and they expressed more interest. Now, outside of Nigeria, again, who is behind Boko Haram? Who funds Boko Haram? Who created Al-Qaeda? Who created ISIL? Who created all these jihadist organizations?
The West.
Absolutely. Now you've answered the question. And if the West created them and they are creating havoc, wreaking havoc all over the world, and it is the West that created them, really would be very naive to assume that we should always look to the West for help when we're fighting them. Now, the Malians have realized this, and they've taken measures, and they're taking destiny into their own hands, throwing the French out, and they're fighting with Russian help in Mali. The same with Burkina Faso, the same with Niger Republic, the same with Central African Republic, the same with a number of other African countries where Russian military assistance is appreciated. And let me end with this. The Russians are probably the only country in the world, or Russia is the only country in the world that has successfully fought against the jihadists, suppressed them, thrown them out, and established a strong Muslim zone or strong Muslim province within their own country. They pride themselves on being number one Christians and also both number one Muslims. They say, we are a Christian state and we are a Muslim state. And you go to Chechnya, you see what is happening there. One of the strongest components of the Russian military today comes from Chechnya. 99% Muslim, very strong Muslims. And what happens, or what's happening there? The Russian government respects them as Muslims, reveres the Holy Quran as they revere the Holy Bible, unlike in our country, or in our part of the world, or our allies, where today is Easter, and what happens in America today? They've declared it the day of transgender recognition, or some ludicrous thing like that. That's what the Biden government has done. What's happening here is that we have a situation whereby we are not being helped by our allies, traditional allies, and it's time for us to begin to reach out to other people who are ready to help to fight the enemy and put Nigeria right back up where it belongs.
Fantastic. But don't you see Russia's foray, particularly in the Sahel, as a new form of neocolonialism, just like the one you frowned about, talking about the West not helping us in terms of security, stifling, the Africans in terms of its human resources, material resources, where they only take away raw materials and bring finished products 4 or 5 times the cost of what they've taken. Is this not another form of neocolonialism?
Well, I can assure you that from my experience, and if you look at the history of Russia, if you look at, which I'm very familiar with, if you look at what happened during the Russian Revolution, the Soviet Union, when they were so, Russia has always supported those that are considered themselves to be liberation fighters and progressives, particularly in Africa. They have always committed resources, manpower, arms, and so on and so forth to liberation movements, whether it be South Africa, Angola, or anywhere else. They've always committed. Russia and Cuba have always stood with the people of these countries and pitted themselves against neocolonialist and imperialist forces that seek to hold us down.
But with the Wagner brothers now in Guinea, in Mali, in Burkina Faso.
I'll come to Wagner in a moment, okay. but the history of it is very, very clear. Historically, Russia and Soviet Union have always stood against the oppressors in Africa. Now, if you look at what the West has done in Africa, and I won't go into that in this program, we can have another program on that. I mean, if you look at what they've done, it really is quite alarming. And I don't have anything against the West. Like I said, I have many friends in the UK and in America and so on and so forth. But the record is very, very, very murky and sinister. And of course, their intentions are equally murky and sinister in my view. Look at France. I don't need to tell you what they've done in the Francophone countries. Look at the UK. Look at America, so on and so forth. Basically, they control everything in this country. They influence everybody in this country. And they've got their fingers deep in all the spheres of human endeavor in Nigeria, even in governance. They tell us what to do. They kick us around. They have enslaved us through what you call the second debt, the second slavery. That is the debt burden that we have in this country. And they control everything, dictate to us, oh, well back, you must do it like this, you must do it. All these things, these are shackles. The second slavery, that's what it is. Now, the Russians have never, ever, ever come along and tried to tread that path. Theirs is a very simple thing. Listen, we believe you should break that colonial yoke. We believe you should be your own men. We're ready to assist you in terms of real development, not the mercantile nonsense.
Why is Russia not allowing Ukraine to go?
Well, I'll come to that in a moment, but they are not interested in holding you down in terms of development. If you look at the infrastructural development, if you look at the kind of rubbish that we've been suffering over the years, even to help with our electrical grid, even satellite to catch all these criminals and all these terrorists and so on. The Americans have not done their bit. They really have not been very good allies. What the Russians do wherever they go is that when the enemy raises its head, that is the terrorists, they fight them and they support you to the end. Yes, it is true that they also ask for something in return. They're honest about it. What do they ask for? You spoke about Wagner. The deal usually there, and it varies from place to place. Listen, we're coming in. We're going to fight these guys for you. We're going to equip you. We're going to support you. We're going to train you. But we'll do an effective job. In return, we want to have mineral resources. It's a fair trade. They don't pretend. They don't come and lecture us and tell us this is how you must live your lives. This is what you must do. This is how you must do it. And if you don't like it, we'll impose visa ban on you and so on and so forth. Straightforward. It's a humanitarian gesture, and at the same time, it is one of pure quid pro quo. But they always stand by the oppressed, and this is something that I've noticed about. And if you look at their history, if you look at the history of the Russians, like I said, I'm very familiar with it. They have never been defeated by any foreign power in the history of the world, which is why those that are toying, and we'll come to Ukraine in a minute, with the Third World War over Ukraine and possibly over Gaza, they are making a very big mistake because the Russians have never lost. Napoleon tried it with the French. They lost. The Germans tried it. Hitler tried it. He lost. Everybody that has tried to defeat Russia and colonize Russia or occupy Russia has lost. They've never been defeated. In the Second World War, they lost 20 million people fighting the Nazis. And guess who were the people that really defeated the Germans, the Nazis? It was Russia, the Soviet Union. They were the first to enter Berlin. And then, of course, there was the Cold War. And this is why it is a reckless thing for people to be baiting the Russian bear into a Third World War today. They've never lost. Now, coming to the Ukraine, and that I think is a very, very important question. People need to understand the history of that conflict. And if you understand the history of it and you know it, then you will agree that definitely the Russians have been provoked into doing what they were doing. And I can go into that if you would like me to.
Very quickly.
All right, yeah, sure. What happened was at the time that the
USSR was split and the rest.
The Soviet Union broke down and went their different. A number of countries emerged. And the deal was simple and clear. I'll simplify this. The deal was simple and clear. The Western powers led by America and NATO said, look, we don't want you to maintain the Soviet Union. We want the wall to come down in Berlin, and we want to have good relations with you. So you democratize, you break up the Warsaw Pact, all of you be of good behavior.
And come join NATO.
And come and be democracies and so on and so forth, and let's all be friends, and let's trade. That's the way forward. And the Russians, with the new wave in Russia, with Putin in power, initially there were Yeltsin, then Putin, there was a new wave, perestroika, if you remember. They agreed to this, and they did everything they were asked to do. They dismantled the Soviet Union, it broke apart, they let all the various Soviets go, stepped up their own countries and so on and so forth. But there was one condition that the Russians gave right from the outset, the Soviets gave. Listen, you must not allow NATO to encroach onto our borders. That's all we ask. We've let go of the Warsaw Pact, which was the counter to NATO, but don't put the knife on our neck. Give us your word. You will not go any further than Germany. And the word was given over and over and over again. But what happened after that? Year in, year out, each decade went past. They would encroach one country, another country, and they kept warning them, you are getting closer to us. You're putting the knife to our neck. We don't want nuclear weapons anywhere near us because that would make us vulnerable. In the same way that you would not allow Cuba to have Russian nuclear weapons on your border, or Mexico or Canada. We don't want this. The West ignored them systematically, kept on doing it in their characteristic manner. And what happened in the end? At the end of it all, they went all the way through to Poland. All these countries now joined NATO, which is something they pledged not to do from the outset. They joined NATO and left Mother Russia very, very vulnerable. And the last straw was the Ukraine. And what happened in the Ukraine? The Americans, led by the CIA, went in there, destabilized the country, ensured that a popularly elected democratic president was pushed out, who was pro-Russia, and just wrought havoc in the place, brought in another president, and then eventually you now had this individual that's there now called
Even
Zelensky.
after Crimea had gone, I mean, Russia
had always had a historical claim to the Crimea, and of course they kept telling them, listen, we will take Crimea, we'll take it all if we can. And what happened? It provoked a military reaction. Why? Because the Ukrainians were saying openly that they wanted to join NATO. The Ukrainians were provoking them, led by America. They were a puppet on America's string, and consequently all hell broke loose. And the Russians had no choice but to go in. And let me explain this very carefully as the last point. Virtually half of the Ukraine is Russian speaking. Those people on the eastern part of the Ukraine, Russian speaking people who love Russia, who would much rather be part of Russia than they would Ukraine. And they were being persecuted, they were being slaughtered from 2014 up until literally the time the war started, being bombed by various governments from the center of the Ukraine, from Kiev, and that is also what provoked the Russians. And so it's two things: persecution of the Russian people within the Ukraine, and secondly, the Russian-speaking people within Ukraine, and the encroachment of NATO, who clearly were only interested in one thing: establishing a unipolar world where America ruled the waves, and they wanted to break Russia down and possibly attack Russia. Consequently, there was a reaction from Putin, and I admire him immensely. I would have done the same if I were president of Russia, and he went in and he did what he had to do. And they're doing it, in my view, in a very limited way. They could have crushed the whole of the Ukraine overnight, but they've tried to be limited, they've tried to be restrained.
With the human catastrophe that they've visited.
It could have been 100 times worse. If they were doing a Gaza on them, it would have been much, much worse. And thank God they're not.
And how do you see the Middle East crisis, the Israelis and Hamas, the human sufferings? Look at the Pope's speech today. It was very clear on that. There was a sermon from Gaza there too, and it was clear that the human suffering.
Well, do you want me to be very frank with you on this program?
Ahead.
If you want me to, I will be. If you don't want me to, I will not be. Do you want me to be frank with you?
Go ahead.
Fine. What is happening in Gaza is the most heinous, vicious, disgraceful, genocidal act that has taken place literally in the history of our country, in the history of the planet Earth. It is not only heinous because it is being done. It is not only heinous because women and children are being slaughtered on a daily basis, bombed, shot, starved to death, subjected to ethnic cleansing, mass murder, genocide, everything you can. Not only for those reasons, but because we watch it on a daily basis, thanks to Al Jazeera, and the whole world is sitting back and doing and saying nothing. Yes, people are marching in the streets.
There was demonstration all over the world.
People are marching
today.
all over the world. Thank God for that, particularly in the West, all over the world. Not just Muslims, Christians, even people that don't even believe in God are marching and saying it is too much. But what does little Israel do? Absolutely nothing. The Israel that we've all grew up to love and respect and support and defend has become a monster of a country that has no kind of feeling for humanity, no sense of restraint, no sense of decency. Yes, October the 7th took place, and the whole world was horrified by what happened. But did it start on October the 7th? Go back a little further. These people, the Palestinians, have been under occupation for 75 years. 75 years. Gaza was nothing but literally a prison, an open prison, in which anything going in had to be cleared by the Israelis, whether food, whether gas, whether oil or whatever, had to have permission from the Israelis before going. These people were just there being treated like animals. And then what happens? They react to it. And they did something to find a way of telling the world, listen, we're not going to sit here and allow this to go on much longer. And this is what happened. And then after that, look at what the reaction was. Disproportionate reaction, mass murder, genocide, ethnic cleansing, every day. And we are watching it. And nobody is saying anything. The UN Security Council keeps on vetoing any call for a ceasefire, even to call for a ceasefire, for the world to come together and say, stop this nonsense, stop killing innocent people. They say they're fighting Hamas. Okay, fine, fight Hamas. Don't kill 6-year-old, 5-year-old, 2-year-old babies and children in the name of fighting Hamas. They say whenever they bomb a building, somebody's home or a church or a mosque or whatever, they say that Hamas was hiding under the people there. And you kill, what, 10,000 people simply because you believe 1 or 2 Hamas soldiers are under? They say that they don't care what happens. They say they need to completely ethnically cleanse that place, throw them into the river, throw them into the sea, and ensure that nobody's there, or perhaps the Sinai Desert. One of them even said, and when I say these things, I'm talking about their ministers. I'm not talking about the ordinary people. One of their ministers said they should drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza and end the whole thing once and for all. Another one said there are 2.5 million Gazans. Why not spread them into, I think he said about 10 different countries, or was it 100 different countries throughout the world? 100, I think he said, and put 25,000 in each country so we can have Gaza to ourselves. And what happened? The Americans have encouraged this, supported it, stood by them, and refused to condemn them. Now they're having issues because even in America itself,
why are the borders in the Middle East not
complaining.
open to the Palestinians so that at least they
You mean
can-
the Arab borders? You mean
Yeah.
the Arabs? You mean for
Yeah.
Egypt?
Jordan, for example.
Very
Egypt,
simple,
why,
very simple.
Why are they not opened? I mean, with the kind of humanitarian
Sure.
sufferings that the world has come to see.
It's a very simple answer to that question, and people have been asking that question for many, many years. The reason why they will not open the borders is simply because they refuse to accept the idea that the Palestinian people, particularly the Gazans, should be pushed out of their own territory by the Israelis. The whole idea is for them to open the borders so that there will be no Palestinians left. In other words, bomb them and let them all run away. And the Palestinian people, who by the way, 90% of them, 90% literacy rate in that part of the world. It's remarkable. I never knew that until I started doing the research. Have said, listen, you can kill us for the next 100 years. We will not leave our land. We will stand there, we will fight, we will die here. And that takes courage. And the Arabs have said, listen, we stand by you. We will not open our borders for you to come here unless you choose to come here yourselves. But if you choose not to come, we will not open our borders for you to come. Because in doing that, we'll be helping Israel to achieve their objectives. Listen, Palestine is reality. It will always be there. It was there for 2,000 years before the re-establishment of Israel in 1948. Somebody comes back 2,000 years later and says, this is my land. Fine. Accommodate everybody that's been there for that 2,000 years. Don't say that it is a state for only European colonials. By the way, look at them. Netanyahu and all the cabinet, they're all European colonials. They're not even Semites. They're not even really from there. They were in Ukraine, they were in the UK. Then they came back as white European settlers. And they now oppress the local people in the name of Zionism, which in my view, you told me to be honest, and is an absolutely disgraceful, contemptuous form of government, which basically says that everybody is below us. We are the chosen race. We are people that the master race, loved by God, and everybody else is nothing but an animal.
The same people who don't believe in Jesus Christ.
They don't believe they don't believe in Islam. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in Christianity. And look, for them, spitting on Christian churches is a matter of culture. For them, killing Muslims and killing Arabs is a matter of culture. They see it as a duty. I think it is absolutely wrong for us to accept this. And in my view, and I've said this over and over again in my write-ups, I have come to the position that I'm questioning the right of Israel to even exist anymore, given what they've been doing over the last few months.
Well, Femi, I thought just now, former President Olusegun Obasanjo must have made the mistake making you aviation minister instead of the foreign minister there. Thanks for the knowledge on international relations and diplomacy. Femi Fani-Kayode is the former Minister of Aviation in Nigeria.
Thank you.